Welcome back, everybody, to week 5 of the Liberation Music Therapy series. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on the fourth spoke of the praxis wheel, which is empathetic concern and compassionate action. Just a bit of a reminder of what we have covered thus far. We spoke about being engaged and not entangled, and then we introduced the concept of the praxis wheel, which is 8 spoke on practical ways on how to move through or spaces filled with suffering. And we've thus far covered how to enter the space with a trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive practice, how to be culturally relevant, identity-affirming, and how to be accessible and be nuanced in your approach to participation. Today we're going to be looking at empathetic concern and compassionate action. And the first part, empathetic concern. The first term that I want to introduce is solidarity. So solidarity is the conscious commitment of people to stand with one another across differences in pursuit of shared dignity, shared justice, shared well-being, recognizing that one's group liberation is also bound to the survival and liberation of all. So solidarity is really about connecting amongst different groups. Fred Hampton really spoke about this with the Rainbow Coalition, communicating with the Young Lords, which was a Puerto Rican radical group, as well as the Young Patriots, Southern white leftist group, who have all the weird complications that white people love to bring to spaces, but we're also very much a part of the anti-racist solidarity movement. And so that was Fred Hampton speaking about the Rainbow Coalition, and he really felt that fascism was the greatest threat to the general population, and the only way to properly beat fascism was by building a Rainbow Coalition, which is connecting across multiple community and building across class lines to break through caste systems. And so that's a big piece of what solidarity is. And so we think about it as we all have a shared fate. The condition that my group's survival is linked to every group's survival. Now, it gets so bizarre when we actually start to talk about what a group, because every person is constantly shifting between this group and this group and this group. You can literally be an oppressor in one moment and a marginalized person in the next instance. So the point is that we are humanizing the experience. We're humanizing everybody's struggles. I have found that this is just because of how I operate. I work on most extreme and work inward from there. But I have found that when I realize every community in some way, shape, or form has been impacted by genocide, that has made me really step back when a person is becoming reactive or when a person is becoming hostile. It doesn't mean that their behavior is necessarily justified, but there is something in their history that is jostling. And so I just keep that in the back of my behavior whenever communicating with any other person, that somewhere in their historical history is a piece of historical trauma. I could speak about my own historical trauma. Let's go to the most unoppressed piece of my identity, which is my whiteness. My whiteness links to my Scottish ancestry, who were quite literally the first group to ever be oppressed by the English. It does not mean that I am experiencing every experience that the Scottish ancestors 1,000 years ago were going through against British imperialism. That is not to make that argument. But the argument that there is a piece of my lineage that gave me this skin color that experienced direct colonial oppression somewhere in this lineage. By knowing that, I can absolutely connect with other groups in some way, shape, or form. just on the understanding where my own reactiveness may be coming from. It's a little vague. It's a little weird to make it that point. I don't really like to focus on my whiteness as being the space of building solidarity. But the point that I'm trying to make is that every single person has different pieces to them. I come from a working class background. I am a domestic violence survivor. There are many pieces that are a part of my quite real traumatic experience, my lived experience, let alone some of the historical traumas. And so just realize that if you have experienced trauma, you can relate to another group, another person who has experienced trauma. It's really important to engage in active alignment, so not sympathy. It's about aligning individual dignity with collective struggle. I cannot rest conceptually as an activist knowing that one group is starting to feel more comfortable while another group is still not feeling dignity. And if not every group is feeling dignity, we cannot stop. And the way to make sure everybody is experiencing dignity is through collective struggle and collective healing. The last piece of solidarity is that it's a commitment to systemic change. It's not just for personal help. You are working on behalf of other people, working on behalf of the community at large. So that's the starting point where I would like us to begin thinking about what empathy even means. Get into empathy. So that gets to the second point. This is mutual aid. And mutual aid is a concept, it was named in the anarchist school of thought. Peter Kropotkin, a geographer and social theorist, as well as one of the founders of the anarcho-communist school of thought. He wrote The Conquest for Bread, which is a really, really great book on just how to structure a horizontal society. He literally wrote the book Mutual Aid, and it was to conflict with the social Darwinists who were out at the time. So to put everything into perspective, Charles Darwin is an extremely important scientist, and there is not a single piece of his discovery and understanding of the concepts of evolution that even conflict with the concepts of solidarity or human empathy or human cooperation. There is a group of pseudoscientists from the 19th century. The first man who I believe coined the term was a man named Herbert Spencer. And these were pseudo-intellectuals who came up with the term of social Darwinism. So applying the evolutionary structure of how the world slowly evolves through time and applying it to direct lived experience as if various groups were just meant to be higher on a totem pole than others. It's a very, very offensive, disgusting way to view the world. It's complete pseudo-science, complete pseudo-philosophy. But if you've ever heard the term survival of the fittest, this did not come from Charles Darwin. This came from Herbert Spencer. So survival of the fittest is not based in Darwinism. It is a pseudoscience argument that was used to be pro-eugenics, pro-separation of races, pro-labeling people as a certain type of race. If you've ever heard the terms Caucasoid or Mongoloid or Negroid, those are all 19th century race science terms that are all nonsense and are oftentimes attributed to Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a scientist. He did not agree with this. He thought this was complete bastardization of his work. And I'm not defending him beyond that. I don't know much about his personal life or who he was as a human or any of that, but I do know his work regarding Origin of Species, and he very much was against the concept of survival of the fittest in regards to how evolution actually works. So all of this to get into mutual aid, which Peter Kropotkin put forward that not only is there an evolutionary practice of traits moving forward through time, but that human beings are a social species. We actually use collective cooperation more than competition in regards to building up structures and societies. Now, I'll give just a big example of how this is often used. So, anytime there is a white nationalist terrorist or uh, some kind of person trying to go out and do some kind of major act to disrupt society, there's this very silly, very ridiculous trend of trying to take out the power grid. Uh, Now, this concept comes from the book called The Turner Diaries. The Turner Diaries was a white nationalist book that was written in the, I think, the 70s by a neo-Nazi named William Pierce. And this book has basically been the archetype for white nationalist terror. They found a copy of the Turner Diaries on Timothy McVeigh, who was the individual involved with the Oklahoma City bombing. They found the Turner Diary involved with many Atomwaffen members who, anytime you've heard of a neo-Nazi trying to take out a power grid, like the instance that I'm speaking about right now that happened in 2023 in Baltimore, where a group of neo-Nazis tried to take out a power grid. So this is something that white nationalists often think about doing, and it comes directly to this book. That is a stupid book. It's a bad book, but they struck their behavior off of this, and so blah 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 blah. White nationalist terrorists. These are people who are fighting on behalf of white supremacy. They are not just benefiting from white supremacy, but actually trying to fight. And one of the arguments, and this is to me one of the arguments on why white supremacy is not a natural thing and why it is a human constructed piece, but these white nationalist or white supremacist terrorists always want to take out the power grid because the argument is that once the electricity is out, humanity will disrupt into total chaos. This has never happened. This has never happened. This has never happened once. Anytime there is a natural disaster or a global terrorist attack or a gigantic, just horrific event, people congregate together and start helping each other out. There is a natural instinct to start helping each other and help with survivorship. And I am very confident that most people here have experienced this in some way, shape, or form. I can tell you all from personal experience. The day after Sandy Hook, here in New York, you walked outside, people were just out helping each other. I was one of the people too, just so y'all know. My wife was too. It just felt natural to just feel, okay, what do you need help with? What do you need help with? Now, of course, this doesn't mean that this lasts forever. This does not mean there are not people that come to these events in bad faith and are doing something maybe to eventually take advantage of something down the line. This doesn't mean this doesn't happen. But the argument is that human beings are very naturally cooperative and helpful. And we oftentimes forget about this mostly because of ridiculous pseudo-race science and pseudo-race philosophy that was put out in the 19th century. I've heard people to this day use terminology from 19th century race science just in casual conversation, not realizing what they're saying. And I'm not just talking about oppressive people. I'm saying I've just heard words get said where it's like, whoa, if you only knew where that word came from. So it's something to keep in mind. Solidarity and mutual aid. Now there is one other piece before we get into empathy, one other term. And it's kind of the opposite of mutual aid, but not really. It is more of just in the field. But this is the bystander effect. And the bystander effect is a social phenomenon in which individuals are less likely to help someone in distress when other people are present. When more witnesses are there is almost a feeling of less personal responsibility if nobody acts. A very good example, just to put into perspective, have you ever been in a busy train station or subway station or somewhere on the street, and you just see a person laying on the ground, and everybody just keeps walking past that person. No one stops and goes, "How are you doing, sir? Everything okay, sir?" It doesn't mean that that is a thing that you should do. It does not mean that it is something that necessarily healthy for the person to have constant interruption with their day, with people constantly prodding and getting in their business. But the point is that it helps illustrate when we are in our own life where you may see something that you find disturbing, but just continue on with your day because you feel that it will either be taken care of by someone else or it's just not something you should be involved with. So that's what the bystander effect is. I forget the case exactly, but the term came about in the 1960s where there was a young bartender who was, I think it was New York, but there was a sexual assault and murder that was loudly heard in an apartment building, and nobody called the police while this was happening. People have a natural inclination to help, but we sometimes have a fear of stepping forward to start the help. And if you are one of the helpers, this is something to just be aware of. For instance, if I am driving on the highway and I see a car stopped on the side of the road and I don't have the ability to stop and check on the person, I always call 911 just to check and put a report that there's a person on the highway. The argument from my own personhood is that I would much rather be one of 15 calls saying, "Hey, there's a person there," and have the person go, "Yes, we've already heard about this," than assume that somebody has called and there's actually a person trapped on the highway who doesn't have a cell phone and is in a very dangerous situation and can't get any help. So this is just something I like to put forward. So solidarity, the concept of we are all humans and we need to build that human community first. Mutual aid, the concept that human beings are instinctively cooperative and instinctively helpful with one another. And then being aware of the bystander effect, which is that when there are more people present and a situation is happening, the more people that are there and nothing is happening, the less likely it is that somebody is going to step up and do something. So these are just terms to be aware of. So now we're going to get into the actual concepts of what we need to explore today. So what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to recognize, understand, and feel with another person's emotions or experience. So the way that I think about it is empathy is really the feelings that you experience. I am feeling something for you. Whereas sympathy, what is sympathy? It is the feeling of concern or care for another person's suffering without fully sharing or understanding their experience. So sympathy is, I see that you are struggling and I feel concern for that you're struggling. Whereas empathy is, I understand you are struggling and I'm here with you. So these are both good things. I try to emphasize that feeling sympathy is not a bad thing. Feeling sympathy is actually a good thing. That means you are a healthy feeling person. But sympathy should, too much sympathy, not much empathy. They may be feeling empathy themselves, but they don't understand that their actions are sympathetic and not empathetic. It's the sympathy, I think, is a very healthy thing to feel, but there is a difference of trying to address what a person's going through without actually knowing what they're going through. And empathy is a way on how to actually feel what the person's going through. So let's get into the three types of empathy. So the first is cognitive empathy. And this is how to understand another's experience on the intellectual. So this is when you have empathetic thoughts. It's perspective taking. You can hear another person's story, you can comprehend it, you can completely get what they mean. I put here just understanding sadness is not the same as feeling sad. I can witness somebody feel sad and not be sad, but I can still understand their sadness even if I am not sad in the moment. This happens a lot in hospice care. Of course, death is sad. Of course, every patient to some way, shape, or form impacts me in some way, shape, or form. But there is a major difference of me being with the third person on their deathbed for me that day versus this is my mother on her deathbed. There is a major difference in the way we're going to feel that sadness. So cognitive empathy is the thoughts, the understanding. You can put yourself in another person's shoes. Cognitive empathy is extremely helpful for the work that I do, where, just to be clear, if I'm working with somebody who's in a white nationalist group, I have to do some cognitive empathy to understand that the behavior I'm witnessing is actually very similar to what might be going on in a Latino gang group or youth gang. So the point is that with the intellectual empathizing, you can put people into different situations and understand the similarities of situational experiences. So cognitive empathy is extremely important to develop and to pay attention to. Now, the second form of empathy, this is our feelings. This is the actual body, when you feel things within the body. So we might call this emotional empathy or the nervous system mirroring. The automatic experience of feeling in your own body and your own nervous system. It can almost be as if somebody's emotions are transmissible. A really good way to think of affective empathy without even human engagement is if you've ever read a story or seen a movie and a storyline in the movie makes you sad. That is affective empathy. It doesn't even necessarily have to be about a human being. But it is about having the actual feelings from an outside experience impacting your internal experience. So again, to review, cognitive empathy, which is our thoughts, affective empathy, which is our feelings. Now, both of these are extremely important to have, but it's much more important and much healthier to have a balance between them. And that is what we might call compassionate empathy. The care is the actual motivation to support the action without necessarily forgetting about the emotional experience. So what I mean by this, it's important to understand a person's situation, and it is extremely important to be able to feel a person's situation. But it is healthier for us in our position to really put our empathy towards the process, the behavior of care, the behavior of being concerned about a person. I'm going to put forward two examples of somebody who might have cognitive empathy with no affective empathy versus somebody who would have all affective empathy with no cognitive empathy. So the most extreme case of somebody with extreme cognitive empathy, somebody who can really know a person's experiences on an intellectual level, somebody with psychopathy. A psychopath completely understands how to empathize with people, just not on a felt level. They have so much trouble understanding that fear, they know what fear feels like, but they have no idea how to put that feeling or onto another's experience. A psychopath will literally look at an object, let's say you've got a bottle, and will take a bottle from here and move it to here. And they will not have any thought about moving the bottle from here to here because the bottle has no cognizance or no humanity. A psychopath will do that exact same behavior with a human being. They don't have the ability to have affective empathy. So that is the most extreme case of cognitive empathy. Somebody with psychopathic behavior. People who are extremely good at understanding a person's experience, but very stunted in their ability to feel that. The other extreme, somebody who would have only affective empathy, borderline personality disorder. This is a person who, if the way I heard borderline personality disorder on a felt level, that helped me understand what a person struggling with that personality disorder feeling. If you could put yourself into the thought of what you would feel like if your entire family died in a crash and you learned about that feeling, what your body would go through when you learn about something that heinous happening to people that you love, your body having just a nervous system shutdown, like a total shock. That is the actual nervous system feeling that people with borderline personality disorder might feel when experiencing a disagreement at dinner or something like that. The most extreme cases you will see is blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I have this opinion about something. Oh, I don't agree with that. The physical feeling that the person feels will be similar to a full execution of loved ones. And so it is a complete inability to put understanding into the circumstances of what's going on, only being able to feel your nervous system and the physical feelings. So those are two most extreme versions of empathy. Are not people with the term psychopathy, I really should say with antisocial personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. Most people do not have disorders, but there is a spectrum between. And this is where empathetic concern is important. It's about finding a balance between our thoughts and our feelings and how we integrate our thoughts, our knowledge, and our feelings, our wisdom. Think about our first session all the way back with engaged and entangled. And how do we balance knowledge and wisdom? We integrate them together to make the wisest choice we can make with our behaviors. So one of the most important techniques for developing empathetic concern is active listening. And this is the intentional practice of focused, responsive listening for understanding and clarity. So it's important. I have kind of 6 steps. I don't necessarily think this cognizantly, but I think of it through 6 steps. And it's really, the first is you prepare to listen. So you regulate your attention and intention. So if a person needs to talk to me, I literally stop what I'm doing, turn, go, hey, what's up? So prepare to listen. Observe carefully. So attend to verbal and nonverbal cues. Pay attention to things. If a person's being standoffish, if they're crossing their arms, if they're really fidgety, if their legs are kicking, things like that. I had a really great is not the word, but I had a very eye-opening experience with a cult recovery group when I started talking about trauma. It was on a Zoom support group, but I started talking about trauma, and everybody started itching and moving and all of these things. And I literally stopped and went, how's everybody doing? Everybody was like, oh, we're good. I'm trauma informed. I know that we were starting to talk about trauma and all these people were starting to have these fidgets. And it was very apparent when you saw a whole Zoom screen of people moving all over the place the moment we start talking about trauma. But the point is that, even though no one in the room was necessarily having a full panic attack, the body was starting to pick up on some of the things we were talking about. So just observe carefully. Pay attention to what's going on. Prepare to listen. Observe carefully. Be present. So maintain undivided attention. When a person's talking, just really listen to them. Just be like, all right, I'm here. I'm here to really pay attention to you. An important thing to do is to reflect back. So you can paraphrase things, confirm understanding. Oftentimes, if I get something wrong, I try to make sure just on the way that I'm going, okay, so you mean, okay, got you. Okay, so you mean this? Oh, you don't mean that. Got it. Could you re-explain? Okay, got it. You can also gently clarify without meaning to, but ask questions for action. And then, of course, respond with care. Offer grounded, respectful responses. I will tell you all, I have been in way too many situation where, the prison setting is almost an easier setting to deal with reactionary beliefs because I'm in a prison. I'm already aware that's going to happen. Hospice care is almost more challenging when I'm in the middle of a room and then somebody starts just telling me QAnon stuff or starts telling me how Hillary Clinton is actually asking for abortions after birth where they kill the baby and drink the blood. I've literally had people just start talking to you like this in the middle of a therapy session for their parent. And, you can't exactly be like, I think you are fucking crazy. So, but you still have to respect and respond with care. And so those are circumstances where it's just like, oh, yeah, there are problems with our political system. Yeah, I agree. Does not necessarily mean that I agree with their QAnon shit, but it's just that you're responding with care because this is a human being who is processing something. And so active listening, extremely important for developing empathetic concern. Authentic empathy. This is just really fluid experience of feeling empathy. But it comes down to four things. You are respecting each person for who they are, for their uniqueness. You are encouraging that expression. So you are developing genuine listening. It is so important to show that you are listening to a person or to a people's. It's just so important. And support. You support growth. Let people make mistakes. That's part of the thing about growth. I have had so many people tell me the most insane things to develop 2 or 3 months later. Be like, wow, I can't believe I had that view, or I can't believe I said it that way, or it's just minor little bits, but it's about respect, encouraging, developing, and support. That's all it is. Notice there's nothing in there about imposing. Nothing is in there about imposing. Even if a person starts telling you QAnon stuff, you just nod your head. And when you're in this role as a facilitator, no matter what medium you're working through, you just got to be respectful. And for practicing empathy, it's important to check in with ourselves. I have to check in with myself all the time, y'all. I'm a white dude. I'm a white man. There are so many things that I say months later, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And I'll even talk to the person sometimes and be like, I'm sorry this thing happened. Sometimes to the, like, oh, I don't even remember that happened. Or I literally had a person say, bro, you're more woke than me. But the point I'm trying to say is that it's important to, no matter how good your behavior is on the surface, it's important to always be checking in with yourself. Because just because you may look good, if you know your intentions are not quite where they need to be, you gotta know that. You gotta know that. I am thankful I'm at the point where my behavior is less and less noticed by marginalized communities that I work with regularly, which is a good sign on the developing of relationship and community. But it is also something that I cannot just be like, all right, cool, I figured it out now. Everything's good. I'm never going to say a racist or sexist thing again. That's not going to happen. That's impossible. So it's important to check in with yourself, to be present. There is no right thing to say. I've got a couple of examples of like an instance. All right, here. I'm going to tell you all some dark stuff that has happened in my own practice on questionable things that I've done. One was I said a homophobic slur in the middle of a session that I literally saw myself about to say it. It was the FAG word, just so everybody knows. I saw myself about to say it. I was in the circumstance with this kid who had just had a big situation, and like it was almost like I had reverted back to my 6th grade self and was just like talking that way. and I actually just let the word come out. I saw, it was like I saw the word coming and I just let it out. And I will tell you all that I did check in with people after that happened, like not at work. People that I check in with that are in my personal life, like being like, yo, I literally said a homophobic slur today at work. Explain the situation. And I'm not going to tell the situation here. Beyond that, it was a person having a moment and they just needed some ridiculous toxic male bonding at that moment. I don't know if I would encourage it. I don't know if I would do it again. But it was just in that moment, it was like, oh my God. And just realizing that that could have gone wrong. It could have been the wrong thing. It probably was the wrong thing. But there are circumstances where, like that is an example that I actually felt in real time, me being like, I don't know if I should say this thought, and it just came out anyways, because there was another area that I was focusing on, which was this particular person's specific circumstance they were in. So that's one questionable thing I've done. I made a point in my life to never let somebody say something bigoted or let somebody say something, any kind of derogatory without at least acknowledging it before I leave the space or before I know I'm going to see them the next time. So if somebody says something anti-Semitic, somebody says something racist, somebody says something homophobic, somebody says something misogynistic, I'll make a point to just address it. Whether, it doesn't even have to be like a big thing. It can just be like pull them to the side afterwards and be like, hey, I actually wanted to ask you about that. Just like, what did you mean by such and such? Just have a conversation. That's something I made a point to do. And I can tell you all the exact moment that I let a person say something absolutely racist right in front of me, and I just weighed the pros and cons and went, you know what? Whatever. This guy can just say whatever he said. So here's the circumstance. Dude was in his 90s, on his deathbed, in hospice care. He was not mean. I talked to all the nurses. All the nurses let me know everything. Like, I know about the patients way before I read their notes, just because the nurses talk to me. And this guy was not causing any problems with the nurses. There were actually some other people that were causing literal problems, like just like behavior problems, like being hard to deal with, hard to work with, all of. So this dude, they're like, oh yeah, he's fine, whatever. Talking to him, just straight up says the N-word in the middle of us just talking. And I froze for like a moment. He was just talking about the nurses around. He was like, these such and such. And he said the thing, and I froze, and it was this moment of like, all right, guy's not causing problems. He's literally about to die. He is literally on his deathbed. I don't think he even knows what he said is as disgusting as it is. You know what? All right, man, what song do you... It was just, that was a moment where it was like, it's time to address this. I just wanted to put those two cases out there that that those are situations that I've found myself in that I still am not sure I made the right choice. But they were real-time experiences that you have to be present when you're working in these spaces, because stuff like that comes up. And sometimes you don't actually know what the right decision is. You're in the moment and you just go with what felt right, and then you have to reflect after the fact. So it's important to just be present and be aware when we're in these spaces, when we're practicing empathy. Judgment-free. Suspend criticism. Suspend assumptions. Suspend the urge to fix. We need to stop trying to fix people. Like, all right, Mr. Neo-Nazi, stop being racist. All right, cool, everybody. I just fixed it. Racism's done. All right, Mr. Crip, I need you to not rob people when we release you from here, okay? Oh my God, he robbed somebody again. Like, it just... You can't try to fix people. It's not something you can do. What we are as an empathizing person is allowing the person to be understood, that somebody else knows what they're going through. Again, I already mentioned this, but pay attention to nonverbal cues. There are certain behaviors that I've become much more in tune with femme presenting folks, just on when certain insecurities comes up where a woman begins to start to cross her arm in front of their self, and it's an indication of a really insecure power dynamic. Something where this I'm being very specific, male centric in my worldview right this moment, but it's a moment of oftentimes people who feel an amount of threatened, conscious or not, uh, where there becomes to be a physical protective shield that goes up, and it happens a lot more in front of me with women than with men. And even queer women and queer men, it tends to happen more with women than with men. And so this is something that I have to be mindful of when I see a person starting to close up. It means that I'm over talking, or it means that I'm overbearing in some way. Even if I'm misreading it, the point is that you just got to be aware of verbal cues where it's like, okay, person looks like they're clamming up, I should step back. It's all about just making sure you're reading cues on how to step back. You're not mind reading the person. You're just making sure that you are not being too much for the person. That's really what we're focusing on. And it's just the type of empathy. Not every situation needs the same response. So sometimes you have to think things through and you don't really need to feel it. Sometimes you need to feel things even if you can't understand it. When I work in hospice care, I have to intellectually understand what a person's going through. I cannot feel that amount of trauma every day. That would be insane. On the flip side of it, I can understand why a person might do something. Like, even if it's something I would never do in my own behavior, I can still understand where the feelings come from. So this is really about building authentic empathy, which is a balance of our thoughts and our feelings and behavior. As the one that actually counts. Our thoughts and our feelings are important for us to learn, and we're going to talk a lot about that next week in mindfulness. But for ourselves as facilitators, as workers in this space, behavior, I would put, is the most important. We have to be focusing on how we empathize behaviorally. So that gets us to part 2. And this is compassionate action. So we talked about empathy and how it is about the thought of understanding a person's situation, the feeling, the understanding, the feeling of a person's situation, and how it's important to find balance between our thoughts and our feelings to impact our behavior. But we also have to be aware that too much empathizing can actually cause empathetic distress. We can have burnout. We can have emotional exhaustion. We can have secondary trauma, which we had spoken about 2 weeks ago when we were doing trauma. Secondary trauma is something we call compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma. But it's important that when we are a person who's taking on a lot of other people's feelings, that we can burn ourselves out. And so empathy is extremely important. But there's a reason why in this praxis wheel we start with trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive. Then we work on being culturally relevant and identity-affirming. And then we focus on being accessible and being nuanced before we finally get to empathy. And that is because it is important to create a safe environment before we then actually develop our empathetic practice. Now, a lot of people taking this workshop or watching these videos are going to be natural empaths. You're going to be a person who feels. That's people who feel are drawn to this work, drawn to this kind of understanding of things. So it's just very important to be mindful of how we empathize and how to find balance between our knowledge and our wisdom, between our rational and our emotional minds. And because too much of it can cause burnout. So, a way to really reprocess is instead of focusing on just empathetic concern, which is the way that we are basically surrounding the environment, the way that we're paying attention to the environment is our empathetic concern. Compassion or compassionate action is actually the way we move through the space. So compassion is the social feeling that motivates people to go out of their way to relieve physical, mental, spiritual, or emotional pains of others and themselves. So the three terms that we've talked about: sympathy, which is feeling towards another; empathy, feeling as another; compassion, feeling for another. Yo, I got this for you. I know I just said it like the way that I talk in the prison world, but that's actually like, yo, I got you, bro. I got you. Doesn't even matter what we're talking about. I will literally have that response. Yo, I got you, or I hear you. I understand. Those pieces help just a person feel like you're actually there for them. So that's what compassion is. You're there for a person, for a people. So, on developing compassion, there's, again, 6 things that I think are very important. Safety and security. If you want to have anybody feel any of your compassion that you're trying to hand out or give to people or put into a room, they're not going to accept any of your compassion if it doesn't feel safe and secure, which is exactly why we build a trauma-informed space with trauma-sensitive practices, culturally relevant, identity-affirming, accessible, nuanced participation, empathetic concern, and compassionate action, safety and security. The other piece, kindness. Y'all, you know how much I am so tired of anti-racist action training that gets into all these details of all these things on what you're supposed to know and what you're not supposed to know. All of that's important. We need to know our history. We need to know our other comrades' experiences. But the amount of times that I honestly think anti-racism training could be boiled down to, hey y'all, can you just be kind? Can you just be nice? Just be nice. Literally. If you are kind, that goes so far. Kindness is essential to compassion. It doesn't matter how self-aware you are or how much you see a person as a human. If you're mean or you're cold, it's not going to have an impact in the way that you want it to be. You just got to be nice. Self-awareness. Knowing yourself. Part of knowing yourself requires self-reflection, meaning that there are things that are going to come out your mouth, or behaviors that you're going to do, or things you're going to think that you're not even aware are privileged or actually causing oppression. But it's on that reflection. You need to be aware, but you also need to be reflecting and constantly growing. I don't like to think of things as a circle, as more of a spiral moving out. So it's almost that, yes, we are moving in a cyclical motion and life does seem repetitive and you do see similar behavior patterns and you do see similar experiences, but it is still uniquely moving forward slightly. So it's important that we are being self-aware, but that we're also constantly reflecting. Mutual humanness. I know that we talk about humanity, but I think humanness almost more important than thinking about humanity. And I'll explain what that means. Humanness is the realization that another person is quite literally a human. And so any experience you have had, if you have ever felt angry, guess what? Person next to you, they've also felt angry. There is a mutual humanness. If you have ever felt something, doesn't matter the magnitude, but if you have ever felt something, one of the 8 primary emotions, you know what it feels like to be another person. Literally know. You don't know the experiences, but you know the feelings. You know what it feels like to be scared. You know what it feels like to be angry. You know what it feels like to feel good. You know what it feels like to be sad. So there's a mutual humanness. So I love the ideas of like we're all in this together. We are all humans, and that's what humanity means, and I agree with that. But I think for our purposes in this particular spoke of developing compassion, we actually have to look at the human beings in our lives and realize on a felt level, an empathetic level, that any experience that you have is a human experience, and all humans, even the ones with the extreme personality disorders that I used as examples earlier, have had those feelings. Warm concern. Uh, you should be concerned about people, but it needs to be a warm concern. And I know that's a little vague to describe, but the way that I consider it is the difference of a person going, "Oh my God, are you okay?" versus, "Oh man, how is everything?" You're saying the exact same intent, but there's just a warmth to the second one that there isn't with the first one. I don't know how to put it any different, other than when I'm talking to people, I always try, when I'm in a situation where somebody's stressed, I always step back. Always. I got you. Yeah, totally. Okay. Like just calm. I'm concerned, but I'm not freaking out. I'm not cold. I'm warm. And then understanding. And this is insight into the causes and context of suffering. So going to the mutual humanness that was mentioned, how any experience you have, every other human being has experienced. This is where the understanding comes in. I have not had the same experience as people who are not white. I have not had the same experience of people who are not male presenting. There are so many different experiences that we do need to just be cognizant of. So awesome. With that, we're gonna have for next week is going to be about embodied mindfulness. And I'm actually really excited about this one because this is probably the least traumatic of all the classes in regard to subject matter, because it's really about meditation and calming the self and calming the room. Um, but yeah, next week is all about embodied mindfulness, which is the awareness rooted in body sensations and movement. Again, I'm going to leave this up for a moment, but this workshop is, I'm calling it Workshop Zero or Course Zero, because this is the one where I'm really developing each week as the workshop goes along to turn this into a real professional course. But that being said, this course, this workshop is, and I plan to forever be free for anybody who wants to participate and learn. But that being said, it does take a lot of labor to do this work, and if you feel you can donate to any of these links here on Venmo, Zelle, PayPal, or Cash App. And then, last but not least, stay connected. Check out my website, www.dorianwallace.com. That's where my projects, performances, and resources are listed. And then my Substack, which is where the essays, workshops, and liberation music and music therapy reflections are. And with that, I will catch you all later and see you next week. Peace.